Hey guys, very good morning. Today we are going to discuss Mark chapter 10 verse 1 to 10. These 1 to 10 verses we are dividing in three parts. 1 to 5 Moses' law on divorce, and 6 to 9 subheading like God's original design of marriage, and the third one we are going to see was 10 to 12 divorce and remarriage in adultery. So before starting our Bible study, we have to read Mark chapter 10 verse 1 to 10 twice and thrice, so that we can understand the whole concept of verse 1 to 10. Now we are going to discuss the first part, 1 to 5 verses. From 1 to 5 verses we can prepare lot of questions from these verses. So here we can discuss some questions like, how did the Pharisees attempt to test Jesus this time? Why was this considered a test and not a sincere question? And the second question, if God doesn't approve of divorce, why did he allow it? What does it mean because of their hardness of heart? The third question we can prepare, are there any other issues in which the New Testament sets a higher or newer standard than the Old Testament? How can we explain this? Are there any Old Testament passages on divorce? We can check it on Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 1 to 4 on divorce. So now we are going to discuss verse by verse here. The Pharisees were constantly seeking to challenge and test Jesus. Many of their challenges were centered on common controversies of the time. It seems that their goal was to get Jesus to declare his position on controversial topics. Once Jesus declared his position, his answer could alienate the people on the other side of the debate. If 50% of people believed that divorce was acceptable, Jesus speaking out against divorce could anger the other 50%. Jesus saw through all of their traps and tricks. Many times he answered the questions they posed in such a powerful way that the entire crowd was speechless. Jesus didn't just quote the canned answers tossed around by his two sides of the debate, but instead offered a fresh and biblical perspective looking to the heart of the issue. Jesus starts off his answers with a question. This allows him to see their level of understanding and the position they were coming from. The Pharisees answers that Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and send his wife away. If you can look at Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 1 to 14, if you can read it, why would Moses allow this? It should be noted that Moses was describing an existing practice of divorce rather than prescribing this method for divorce. The people were already doing this kind of thing. Apparently, this was the normal practice for divorce at this time. The husband could send his wife away if he was unsatisfied. Moses, however, limits this practice by declaring that a spouse twice divorced could not go back to their first spouse. Evidently, this was a common problem, and this was the problem Moses was speaking to in Deuteronomy chapter 24, rather than the more general problem of divorce. Interestingly, by closing this loophole, it would make divorce a lot less attractive for people who thought they could always go back to their first spouse later on with no problem. We don't know why God didn't prescribe more clear and strict rules against divorce in general, much like we don't know why he didn't prescribe clear rules against polygamy in the Torah. We do know that one man, one woman marriage for life is God's natural design, which goes back to Genesis, and that God has always hated divorce. If you can look at Malachi chapter 2 verse 14 to 16, perhaps divorce was not nearly as much a problem at times, so it was not a pressing social issue like today. In any case, a believer who earnestly sought God's will on this issue could have found it, and in the New Testament's God's vision of marriage and divorce is very clear. Jesus said it was because of their hardness of heart that Moses permitted them to do this. When people sinned, the earth and the human race were cursed. Gender conflicts problems were one of the effects of this. We can look at Genesis chapter 3. In some cases, it seems that God allows people to go their own way and experience the results of their own folly. Where we can look at Romans chapter 1 shows this clearly. Another examples in the Old Testament is allowing Israel to have a king. But in God's perfect will and natural design, a husband and wife should not divorce. Now we are going to discuss verse 6 to 9. What is the subheading of verse 6 to 9? God's original design of marriage. Here we are going to discuss God's original design of marriage. Verse 6 to 9, we can prepare lot of questions from 6 to 9. The first question we can prepare: what reasoning did Jesus appeal to make his case against divorce? What was Jesus' conclusion about divorce? So what is God's view on divorce? What are some of the negative effects of divorce? The fourth question: how does divorce affect the picture of marriage between husband and wife as an allegory of Christ and the church? If modern day culture applied this principle of no divorce, how could culture look different? Why is this important for married couples? Why is this important for singles? How can singles prepare now so that this doesn't happen to them in the future? So already we had gone through Malachi chapter 2 verse 14 to 16. God hates divorce. And we can look at Romans chapter 7 also, bound together as long as both live. And 1 Corinthians also we can see that teaching especially on a Christian spouse married to an unbeliever. They shall be one flesh. In Genesis we have seen. And in Matthew chapter also we saw, except for the reason of unchastity. In Hebrew also God clearly told that marriage bed should be held in honor by all. So now we are going to discuss one by one. Jesus refers to Genesis chapter 2 verse 21 to 25. His answers takes people back to creation when God made one man and one woman and put them together. The two became one flesh. By quoting Genesis, Jesus shows that this is not a cultural principle. It is not a principle which changes for different times or different place. It is a universal principle rooted in creation itself, where God revealed His perfect plan for marriage. This clearly refutes many of the modern world's excuses for allowing divorce, of which there are many. Marriage is outdated, the world is changing, society has advanced, these kind of excuses they are telling. The passage in Genesis teaches us several basic truths about marriage. What can you learn about marriage from this passage? Marriage is established by God. The first one, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. It is between man and woman. Marriage is between one man and one woman for a grand total of two, thus showing that both divorce and fornication are sinful. And the fourth one, marriage requires a leaving. Parents, marriage requires a cleaving to each other. This means that the spouse is now the most important person and responsibility rather than the parent. Jesus' conclusion is, what therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Jesus' answer is clear. Divorce is wrong. It is sinful and goes against God's established plan from the beginning of the world. So we have seen cross references also. As there are many expectations, there is only one possible exception. It is mentioned in Matthew chapter 5, and is if one side is unfaithful. There is some controversy on this point. How is this verse interpreted? Can you give a clear position on what your church teaches on this point? So, like some holds to the position that is referring to betrothal, like Joseph betrothal with Mary, and that the two sides are not married yet. Whether or not that is the case, when we combine this teaching with other principles in the Bible, we will find that this is so-called loophole practically disappears. In the Bible, we are commanded to forgive. Jesus told Peter to forgive 70 times, 7 times. We are commanded to leave. A husband is commanded to love his wife as Christ loved the church. That includes when she doesn't deserve it. See Hosea. 1 Corinthians chapter 13 describes love as very optimistic. This kind of love attempts to influence and change others by overcoming evil with God. Jesus also told the parable of the prodigal son. How did the father react when the son came back? He ran to him. We can look at 1 John chapter 2 verse 6. We are to be like Jesus, and that include loving how Jesus loved us. So tell me, is it biblical for a wife whose husband has been unfaithful or vice versa to cast them out and immediately seek a divorce? Of course not. The biblical response is to forgive and welcome the offending party back, even if it happens many times. What happens if one side is doing it over and over again? What did God do when people sinned over and over again? He is always ready to forgive. That should be the attitude in marriage as well. The likely result will be that the side who keeps committing adultery will seek a divorce on his or own. In this case, it would appear that the person is an unbeliever anyway, because he or she is living in willful rebellion. In that case, 1 Corinthians chapter 7 applies, which tells that believer to stay with the unbeliever if he is willing, but if the person want to leave, to let him. So here we have learned many things from these verses. Now we are going to discuss verse 10 to 12. What is the subheading? We have seen verse 10 to 12. Divorce and remarriage is adultery. Verse 10 to 12. Verse 10 to 12, we can prepare some questions. Like for the first question, what additional point does Jesus bring up in these verses? Are there any situations where divorce is acceptable? What are some of the most common reasons for divorce? Should Christian couples set a goal of getting divorced? Why or why not? Is this goal high enough? How can Christian couples be continually improving and growing together in marriage instead of just coasting? What are some practical things that husband and wife can do to build up their marriage? What are some practical things which singles can do to prepare for strong marriage? Already we have seen many things like marriage is a picture of Christ and the church, wisdom on marriage, and do not be unequally yoked. I will be betrothed you to me in righteous and justice, in steadfast love and mercy. Overseer must be husband of one wife. Beloved, let us love one another. So these are the things we have seen. These are the statements we have seen in different chapters. Now we are going to discuss verse by verse. Like Jesus goes even farther in these verses to restrict divorce and remarriage. If people read only verse 9, they may have an excuse like, yes, I shouldn't have divorced, but now that I am already divorced, that is a thing of the past and I can marry again. In this verse, Jesus makes it clear that divorce and remarriage is committing adultery. It is adultery for the husband and it is adultery for the wife. If one person is committing adultery, then the other is as well. There are no loopholes here. Why is this adultery? When a couple gets married, they are joined together. In God's sight, this marriage is until death do them apart. While the law may recognize their divorce, God doesn't. Divorce is however, beliefs need to aim much higher than just not getting a divorce. Many couples go through life in practical Cold War state. They share the same roof but are completely distant emotionally, spiritually, and physically. This is not God's desire for marriage. According to most marriage experts, there is about a 1 year time period after marriage that is like a honeymoon. During this stage, everything seems to exciting, fresh and romantic. Couples want to do everything together. After this year, the fresh and exciting romantic aspect will fade at least initially. At this point, couples face an important intersection. They can accept this shift and just go through the motions while living their individual lives, or they can make refocused effort to improve their marriage and get it on in an even stronger foundation. What are some practical things that married couples can do to build up their marriage? Spend time in the Word together, spend time in prayer together, read Christian books together, spend quality time talking, go on dates, serve one another, think of hobbies that both sides enjoying doing together. Be romantic. Both sides can think of exciting and romantic things do surprise the other with. Get away. Take some time every now and again to get away from busy life and spend time together. Set clear guidelines to limit temptation of either party. What about singles? How does this apply to you? What are some practical things which singles can do to prepare for a strong marriage? Set your mind that there is no plan B. Choose your spouse carefully and do not give in to peer pressure to get married quickly because you are old and will not have a chance much longer. Be equally yoked. This is not only means getting married to another believer, but also includes making sure that your life direction, goals and priorities line up with Christ in first place. Discuss important issues together and find agreement before marriage. Observe your potential spouse in real life situations to get to them as clearly as visible. Avoid casual, surfacey, emotion-based worldly dating. Study the Word and Christian books to learn as much as possible about having a strong marriage before getting married. Set clear guidelines for any relationship in order to both limit temptation, set a wise, upright course. Get lot of Christian counsels, get accountability partners. Do not say I do unless you are sure, no matter how much you want to get married. One thing that is definitely worse than being single is being married to the wrong person. So, in next Bible study, we will meet. God bless you. Thank you.